Hey there everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me for another video. I'm your host Prickly Hedgehog. Join me now as we look at Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Now I'd hoped to bring you this a little bit earlier, but of course other commitments meant that I haven't had a whole lot of time with the sim, like you have had it for about a week. So these are my global impressions of the game, my early and raw impressions as I see it at this time, given the small amount of hours that I've had with it, maybe about I'd say maybe 8 hours, so not a whole lot of time. Now, without doubt, this has to be one of the most eagerly anticipated flight simulators of this year. We've been teased for months now with salacious screenshots of aircraft and seen fantastic high-resolution videos of planes conducting aerobatics and flying over major landmarks and landscapes in the world, and also the incredible details from the developers about the lengths of detail they went to recreate the weather, the physics involved in the flight model, the lighting and the precipitation and shadows. All these incredible details have really kind of, again, set a new benchmark for flight simulators. So my early impressions are pretty favorable about what they've achieved here. I think the thing that impresses me the most is just the scale of the sim. It's extremely impressive. You have this ability to fly anywhere on the planet just about. You can select local weather conditions and lighting conditions, and I think that is a wonderful level of immersion and realism. It stitches together what I think most other sims could only hope to achieve. You know, you'd have to do it with sort of individual patches and of large maps or third-party developer maps and things like that of cities and so on and so forth, and try to stitch all those things together. Whereas Microsoft simply just mapped the entire world. And I think, again, that the scale and the degree of achievement here is really, really impressive. And that's the thing that blows me away the most about this game. It's so ambitious, and they've pulled it off, which is clearly setting a new benchmark for, grand scale achievement on flight simulation. Now, obviously, we've got, as I mentioned before, the weather, the lighting, the realistic clouds, and the lighting of the shadows, and how the whole weather interacts with the land. It's a whole new level of immersion and realism. And we're using next-generation graphics, which I think will stand out well over the next several years. I think most of us are accepting the fact that home computer graphics right now are really continuing to stride ahead. We started with the 10 series graphics cards. I own a 1080, for example, Titan Ti. We've pretty much the 2080s or the 20 series graphic cards are really the benchmark for realistic rendition or rendering, and now there's talk of the 30 series graphics cards coming out. So over the next few years, the sim is only going to get better, I think, as more and more people are able to hopefully afford to buy these new computers, but also enjoy this kind of fidelity, if you like, in a video game, which is a pretty demanding game at the end of the day, but is incredible what they've achieved. Now, I guess the flip side is that not everyone right now can obviously enjoy the full Monty version of the game. You can't fully exploit the best out of the systems, but I don't think that should detract from what Microsoft has achieved and the clever use of downloadable information. The beauty of the game is no question, it's outstanding. But like I said, there is that flip side that not everybody can get the best out of that. Now we have, of course, a reasonable number of aircraft out of the blocks, again, depending on which version of the game you purchased. We have the very large sort of passenger jetliners, the 747, the 787 Dreamliner, and the Airbus A350, I believe. And there's also a gaggle of light aircraft to choose from, depending on which package you purchased, again, out of the blocks. I perceive that third-party developers, these add-on developers, are going to provide a lot more. We've already got a small collection of maps and adjustments and objects. I believe there's a plane in there already selling for about $30, so not cheap, and it's only a small aircraft. So I can see it being pretty lucrative for third-party developers and simmers and modders who want to get into that line of selling stuff within the game. Microsoft has pretty much laid out the groundwork for third-party developers to jump on board and really provide a little bit of extra that they weren't able to do in the initial package, if you like. So it's going to be interesting to see how the franchise evolves and matures, and it's very, very common. You see it with other large franchises as well. X-Plane 11, just as an example, where you purchase the the base portion of the game, and then other developers are providing additional things as needed. And it has its pros and cons, obviously, but never consider a flight sim necessarily just complete as a package. Although this package is as a complete is pretty decent. But again, I can see quite a lot of extra stuff coming in, and it being quite lucrative for those third-party modders if it stays as popular as it currently is. Now, of course, the flight sim of this nature doesn't really offer ridiculousness in terms of drama and explosions and stuff that happens like a first-person shooter or some other games would. I don't think we need to recreate that kind of realism in the game in many respects, in terms of planes crashing into buildings or bridges or cars or other things like that. I think we've got enough history in our aviation past to have seen images that have kind of marred aviation a little bit, and I don't think we need to recreate those things necessarily. So I'm kind of pleased that there's a limit to the amount of drama, if you like, or silliness that you would expect to see perhaps in some other games of a more frivolous nature. I think they've targeted it to a degree to a mature audience, I feel, in the sense that we are realistic about what we're getting ourselves into. This is a more sedate form of gaming, but nonetheless challenging, because flying, say for example, instrument flying rules, where you can't see up from down, and you're totally reliant on your instruments to get that aircraft safely from point A to B. It's actually very, very challenging, and does require a high degree of concentration. Even though things aren't happening dramatically around you, you may be in a thunderstorm, which can be dramatic. Your concentration is taken up with flying that aircraft safely, and that can be rewarding in its own way. But it's not going to be as exciting as as I said, some other franchises. So if you're looking for more excitement, then I would suggest, and you still want to fly a flight simulator, then you're really looking at DCS or one of the IL-2 or something like that, or War Thunder, Lord forbid. If that's your bent, don't get into this thinking that this is going to be massively dramatic. It's dramatic in terms of the beauty, it's dramatic in terms of the scale, but in terms of things happening very, very quickly, the game is not lending itself to that. And I think if you're recognized as somebody who enjoys flight simulators, you know what I'm talking about here. I think a lot of the challenges with flying, and certainly pilots would probably recognize this, that a lot of the things that go on in flying are procedural. There's a very strict way in which aircraft are prepared for takeoff, not only from the people fueling the aircraft and loading the aircraft, but also from the pilots prepping their routes, prepping the aircraft for takeoff, what systems that they're engaging in, and in what order, and then also getting that aircraft safely to the runway so that it can take off safely without colliding with other aircraft or running into issues. So that procedural element is actually kind of a nice challenge if you're a flight simmer, because to do it successfully is challenging. You have to be procedural in that sense, and then once you're up and aloft, then you get to kind of kick back a little bit and enjoy the fruits of that process, and enjoy what's going on around you until you come into land again, and those procedures kick in again. So that's the challenge of it, and that's the beauty of flight simulation. But if that sounds boring, then probably this isn't the game for you. So like I said, elements may perhaps seem pedestrian to some players, but I think true flight simmers will understand what I'm saying here, and recognize that that's not necessarily pedestrian. For us, we enjoy those components to flight simulation. And as I said, apart from those procedural elements, there is a lot of beauty in the game, that ability to just fly about anywhere pretty much. And it's been a fun element for me. I've enjoyed going back to my homeland, and I recognize that not everything has been modeled completely correctly or with high degrees of accuracy, but nevertheless pretty darn good. And that's been very kind of almost therapeutic in a weird way. I had hoped to get back to New Zealand this year, this summer actually. But of course, with COVID, that was put on hold, pretty much. So to go back and look at some routes, the route between Wellington and Christchurch was one I flew a lot on 737s as a child, going down to my grandparents' house from Wellington to Christchurch. And on 737s, it was a wild ride coming in and out of Wellington. Often because of the high winds there, you had ocean on either side or seas on either side. So it was a pretty dramatic backdrop to take off from. And with the strong southerly breezes coming in from Antarctica, it was always very exciting, and a trip that I really enjoyed. So going back and experiencing that in the sim has been kind of entertaining. And of course, there's so many other places in the world too that I would like to explore that I probably won't ever get to, for whatever reason, and just to see what those places are like and mimicked, if you like, or simulated in the game is kind of cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the cons. I've kind of mentioned this too, that, not everyone's going to enjoy A to B flying. It's not everyone's cup of tea. And if you're looking for maybe some more drama or excitement or the extra challenge, certainly give DCS a whirl if you're interested in that. Digital combat simulations, they do an incredible job of providing not only their flight sim experience, but also that extra drama of shooting things, blowing things up, and that kind of stuff. And it's if that's more your bent, then by all means check it out. Now, the game does, as I mentioned, it does need a fairly high-end system, and I guess not everyone's going to be able to enjoy at this time the eye candy efficiently or effectively, just because of the the demands that the game needs. You do need a high-end graphics card, I think, and a decent CPU to run this properly, to get all of the eye candy. Nevertheless, you can run it with lower-end systems, but some of the polish may not be there. Some of the exciting stuff that we were wowed with by early footage is not necessarily accessible to everybody. The other thing that's bugged me is quite long load times, which I find a little bit frustrating when you want to get in and fly. And I'm running it on, an SSD drive with a fairly good system. Yeah, I'm using a 1080, so it's an older card. I've got a pretty good CPU and a reasonable amount of RAM, but I've definitely noticed some pretty long load times for the game, and it can get frustrating if you have to log out and start another mission, or you've changed some parameters of your flight because you didn't set it up right, or you suddenly had to pull out of whatever you were doing and then come back to it, and it can detract a little bit because it pulls away your flying time and your flying experience. So that's been a little bit frustrating. And of course, not everything is modeled to that high degree of full fidelity. And again, this may come down to system specs, but also I've noticed things like the larger jets don't seem to be quite as crisp as some of the smaller aircraft, it seems. And one of the other things that's a little bit plastic, I think, in the game is the newness of each plane, which means there's sort of a lack of weathering or wear and tear. Certainly if you compare it to the detail that DCS, Eagle Dynamics, have put into their military aircraft, they feel like working aircraft. You've got streaks of hydraulic fluid here and there, and paint chipped off the rivets, and the cockpit's got a little bit of wear and tear and stuff like that. So those things are lacking in the game. It definitely feels very plasticky inside because everything's so crisp and perfect. You don't see that kind of weathering effect, which I think Eagle Dynamics has done an incredible job of that. So if you're looking for specific aircraft that I'm talking about here right now, I'd refer to Heat Blur's F-14B, which has thousands of polygons. The level of detail that they went into to create that aircraft is phenomenal. And of course, Eagle Dynamics flagship aircraft right now, which is the F-18C, the 18C as well, also pretty good. Although that's seen a little bit of a facelift in terms of weathering and stuff as well. But again, good examples of aircraft where they're a working model, and those things are lacking in Microsoft 2020. I feel that just creates a little bit of a Lego kind of look, if that makes any sense. That just hasn't got the look of aircraft that are seasoned necessarily. I haven't found the controls set up quite as intuitive as I would have liked. Certainly they feel quite sensitive, and it took me kind of a while to set up my rudder pedals properly. The particular set that I had didn't have drivers naturally, and just the way to set that up, that interface wasn't entirely intuitive, and I found that a little bit frustrating. So I'm still getting to grips with trying to get the best out of my HOTAS. The aircraft, of course, are very, very lift capable. You've got such huge surface areas, especially with the larger jets. I mean, those things just rise. There's so much surface area, so much lift. So they can be a little bit of a handful to try to get them under control in terms of your AOA and stuff like that. So still learning a little bit how to do that properly. And again, it's partly my inexperience with it, but again, trying to interact with a HOTAS system that you haven't set up properly kind of adds a little bit of frustration to that. So I noticed too a little bit of clipping with track IR, which means that your head, moving around in the cockpit sort of clips through things like the headrest and stuff like that. And that's pretty common in flight sims. I don't want to be too critical of that. But it also moves outside of the aircraft as well, outside of the cockpit, which I find a little bit frustrating. There's another game that I play that does that, Condor 2. You sort of poke your head right out of the out of the fuselage, if you like, and look around the outside of the aircraft, which it's not a huge deal, but it just lacks that kind of realism. And again, it's just a detractor when you're trying to sit and be immersed in the cockpit environment. So, and I know that Track IR I don't know if that was fully on board from the outset, or if there was some talk about that not being available at one point, and then they said, no, we are supporting that, plus VR and stuff like that. And I don't know how long that took to get into the game, with how far down the development track that was, and I imagine that there will be some tweaks and changes as the flight sim evolves, and as more and more users have time to interact with it and report those things back to Microsoft. So I don't want to be unduly critical here, because overall my flight experience is pretty cool with it. So again, overall, those concerns that I've mentioned aren't deal breakers for me. I'm not looking forward, well, I am looking forward, sorry, to honing my flight skills, and I'm hoping to improve my piloting skills, exploring areas in the world via flight that I can't do in real life right now, and just generally picking up on some things, learning how to fly a little bit better, perhaps learning some rules and regulations around airfields and things that I'm hoping to pick up on as a result of this sim, which I think would be kind of a cool experience to have. So yeah, raw impressions. I think it's incredible. I really do. I know that everybody who watches my channel knows that I'm a DCS person. I will not be, as I said, getting rid of DCS at all. I think what DCS and Eagle Dynamics have achieved is incredible too. But with regards to the global nature of Microsoft Flight Simulator right now, the way in which that they've allowed us to explore the entire world and fly wherever we want, almost unrestricted, is incredible. I just think they've gone, well beyond where anybody else has ever achieved anything, and that's an incredible thing in its own right. Plus the weather, clouds, and the lighting is really, really remarkable too, and I think those elements just create this immersive experience that I think flight simulators have been looking for decades, and it really is a kind of a nice line in the sand as to where flight simulation is right now. And there are not many people that have achieved, similar things. So, and we're not comparing apples with apples. Again, I don't want to detract from other simulators out here who also have done an incredible job. And I want to plug DCS a little bit here, because if you are looking for more of a combat experience, then it's you really can't look any further than DCS. But if you're looking for that civilian sort of commercial experience, then obviously you're going to get it with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. So let's wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what your comments are or thoughts are below in the comments section. Let me rephrase that. Thanks for tuning in again, everybody, and I really appreciate all the likes and subscribes and all the comments from the community here. Carry on flying. We'll see you around. This is Prickly Hedgehog out. Thanks, guys. Take care.